Hello, Sean Oskay, Professor of Design at Southern Oregon University. Today's lecture is Drafting Part 2. And the reason why it's called Part 2 is that there is that introductory tutorial, that first ground plan, which is kind of more of it started out as a slideshow, and it's just walking you through the steps of laying out and drawing your first ground plan. So that's probably the first place to go because it has a lot of introductory information. This one's got a lot more stuff, but it also has some basic things as well. So I just want to jump into that. This is more the kind of big lecture about drafting, whereas you can go back and look at that other one, your first ground plan, if you just need to sit down and do that. You can just look at that PDF. It's in a PDF form as well, and there's a lot of very accessible ways that you can get to that lecture without having to sit down and watch a movie, even though there's a movie version of it as well. So lots of different formats for you. First of all, just reminding you of what drafting is. It's simply a drawing with no perspective. So here on the left, we've got an actual plate of drafting for a little stair unit. And it's in scale. If we look down in the corner there, it says stair unit for the amazing show. And it is in 1 foot equals 1 inch scale down in the little title block area. And then the sides the views are labeled top view, side view, front view. And you see they're all nicely laid out so that those lines carry across. And we have these 3 orthographic views of this stair unit. And this is the kind of drawing that you're going to be able to put a scale rule on and get a measurement. Pretty much all the measurements you need are on this drawing, but if there's something that you wanted to check, you could put a scale rule on the 1 inch blade and pick off any measurement you wanted to from this. Now, that's a little different from this one in the upper right-hand corner here. That's the isometric view. An isometric view of a drawing just means that you're looking at 3 sides. We've covered this in some previous tutorials, but it's not actually something you can usefully pull dimensions off of, even though it's a handy way to see more than one side of a drawing. And it's also not a perspective drawing. So when you go to do your renderings or your sketches, you're going to be drawing a stair unit like this with vanishing points and a horizon line where you're actually going to be looking down at parts of it and looking up at other parts of it. So that's a perspective view. We have all different tutorials on that. So don't confuse this kind of drawing with this kind of drawing or this kind of drawing. We're just looking at drafting right now. So a couple of things to start off with. Please make sure you're drawing on translucent vellum. And vellum I'll provide it for you in class. If you're one of my undergrad students, it's accessible in the bookstore. It's easy to get a hold of vellum, but there's some confusion about it. What vellum wants to be is something that's actually translucent. It's going to kind of feel like wax paper, sort of. It's not vellum coated Bristol or illustration board. Vellum is so nice to draw on that it gets laminated onto other kinds of cardboard so that you can have a nice surface for your pen and ink drawings or whatever. So you might find a pad of paper somewhere that says Bristol on it like this, and you can see it says vellum right there. Well, that means that they've covered part of this cardboard with vellum, just kind of giving it a little skin to make it nice to draw on. So you want something that is thin and translucent, and a sheet of 11 by 17 that you need to draw a ground plan for the generic theater is going to be like pennies, 50 cents maybe at the bookstore. So you shouldn't be spending any more than that. And you don't need to buy a pad of Bristol board that says vellum on it. That's going to cause you problems. So if the stuff you want is going to be translucent, it's going to look like this so that you can actually see through it. Now, in terms of CAD drawings, there is an exception to turning things in on vellum if you are doing a CAD drawing completely on the computer. Then, of course, you can print it out onto bond paper, printer paper, right? But I really want to recommend that you don't do that unless you've taken my Vectorworks class or you have previous experience with drafting software, because it's not the sort of thing that you're going to kind of learn over the weekend. There's a big learning curve for drawing with CAD. So I'll happily accept a CAD drawing from people who know how to use the software in place of a ground plan. If you've already taken my Vectorworks class, for example, or you're bringing it from some other school, but I don't want you to try drawing in a computer program, any kind of computer program, if you haven't had any previous experience. And don't forget too that a CAD drawn plan has to adhere to all the same drafting conventions as a hand drawn plan. We're just changing out the pencil for a mouse. It's something that helps speed up our process. It doesn't replace the drafting conventions that you're learning here in this class. I also will not accept a SketchUp top view. That's not drafting. If you know how to use layout, if you have SketchUp Pro and you know how to use layout, thoroughly know how to do it, again, then fine. I will accept a layout generated ground plan, kind of reluctantly. I think layout's not the best tool to use, but it's adequate. But only if you already know how to use that software. Don't try to teach yourself that overnight. Tracing paper is not acceptable for third year MOTS drafting, and it's not acceptable on the final projects for my undergraduate students. So tracing paper is great. I use it all the time. It's terrific for first drafts to kind of scribble ideas on, and great for storyboards. It has lots of uses, but I don't want to accept tracing paper final drawings. It's just too flimsy. It tears, it smears. It's not a really good tool to use for your final stuff. Neatness really does count. I really want to make sure that you're not turning in things with crumpled edges and nothing that's got smudges or stains. I mean, that there is a neatness category in the grading, and I want to make sure that your drafting looks good. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just can't look like it was in the bottom of your book bag for a week. Please use your tools. I've got another little short video on just how to use your T-square and your triangles, how to properly use those tools. It makes it so much easier if you're using your tools correctly. If you're just trying to freehand everything, or you're just using a triangle, or you're the cutting straight edge for your model building tools, and you're sitting at a table with nothing taped down, it's going to be so much harder. Trust me on this. You think you're saving time by not bothering with the drafting tape and not bothering to lay it all out. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Your just drawing is not going to be as good. It's going to be messy, and it's going to actually take you longer because you're going to spend so much time trying to set up your straight edges that you just take the extra few minutes to set up the drawing properly, and watch that tutorial. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's another one. It's like 10 minutes long, and it shows you how to do all of that kind of setup. A little trick that I wanted to mention in that other one, but I forgot, is if you have one of these simple architect scale rules that are blank, the more expensive ones have little colored stripes in there. Well, you can put a little colored stripe of your favorite color by grabbing a Sharpie and just running it right down that little well that runs down. And if you just draw one line on the 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1 inch edge, all those scales that we use all the time in theater, especially the 1/4 inch in our ground plans, are all on that same side of the blade. So you can ignore all those crazy ones that you need if you're building a bridge or something, and you can just use the scales that we're working in all the time. And that way you don't have to pick up your ruler and look at all three sides until you find the right side. Just put a stripe down the middle of the side that you always want to use, and then it saves you all sorts of time. No freehand drafting unless you are drawing an organic shape. I really want to make that clear. So please just use your straight edges and your templates. You don't want to turn in something like what you've got on the left here. That's what the T-square and those triangles are for, is to make nice, clean, sharp corners and lines. Do yourself a favor and just get a couple of good drawing pencils. You don't need to spend a fortune. It doesn't need to be German engineered titanium, whatever. Just something that's a little bit better than trying to draw with a wooden pencil or those really cheapy Bics that are just a nightmare to draw with. Trust me, I know you've all got them and they're fine for taking notes in class, but don't try to draft with them. They're just not good pencils to use. Again, you can go to the bookstore and spend like $6 and get 3 $2 pencils that you'll have for forever, because they're pencils. It's not some special tool that you're never going to use again after this class. You'll have some nice pencils, but that's all you need is $1.95 or whatever on a pencil. I recommend getting them in different colors, and then you can put one with a hard lead like a 6H, and one with a medium lead like a 4H, and one with a soft like a 2H, or whatever combination of the leads that you want to use. But please don't use wooden pencils or cheap Bics on your drafting. It's just going to be messy. In the first ground plan lecture, we talk about the different ranks of lines. We're going to use the heaviest lines. That's going to be a soft lead, and you're going to draw those last on your drawing because you don't want to smear them around. And that's going to be the permanent parts of your theater, the section cut of your theater walls, the actual architectural elements. The second rank lines are the one that you're going to want to be using the most of, so make that the pencil lead that you really are comfortable with. You want a nice, clear, sharp black line, and that's going to be all the real things on your set. So walls, doors, platforms, furniture, lettering probably in this rank, all that kind of stuff is going to be in that pencil that you're using the most. And maybe that's your 2H or maybe your 4H if you press really hard, that kind of thing. The first rank lines are the hardest lead, so the 6H perhaps, and those are going to be your drafting convention lines. Centerline, dimension lines, hidden lines, anything that's not real, like the swing of a door arc. That's the door's there, but the little half circle, quarter circle that we draw is a line to indicate which way the door is swinging. It's not something we're actually going to build. So anything like that gets those lightest rank lines. We're not going to build a center line. The center line is implied in the drawing. Don't leave gaps at corners, and don't overshoot the corners. That's something I see a lot of, and a lot of times there's, you're kind of overshooting with multiple lines and it gets kind of blurry. So one nice clear line, not multiple sketchy lines. Because again, if you were to sit down and try to pull a measurement off of this in the scene shop, which one of these lines am I going to have to look at here? I can't tell which of these is the line that I need to measure from. So you want one nice clear line, not a bunch of sketchy ones. And also watch the line weight and quality. That category in the grading that says line quality, this is what I'm talking about, where like this is one shape here. Say this is a platform or something, and there's one really thick smeary line up here, and this line over here is really nice. That's a good line. And then this one gets too thin, and they're overshooting, and there's gaps, and there's all kinds of little flaws in this that we don't want to encourage. So you want a nice, clear, even level of line all the way across, and you want nice sharp corners and no gaps and all those kinds of things. There's that little trick about rolling your pencil to keep it nice and sharp as you go along a long line. In the little tips and tricks video that I've got later on, I actually demonstrate that so you can see that process, and I encourage you to do that. And please consider getting Dennis Dorns drafting for the theater book if you're in my drafting class. This is one of the few books I require, but I'd also recommend it for the MOTS grad students. It's a handy book to have, or at the very least you can just get the UCIT drawing guides, and that's just a PDF that you can download in many places. This is just one of many links, or you could I just found that link by just entering UCIT drawing guidelines in Google and came up with that link. And the nice thing about that is it's got there's 4 pages in there that are just like this one. This is one of those 4 pages that just kind of breaks down all of the different types of lines and the different symbols that we use. There's really not that many symbols that we use in theater, and there's like 4 pages like this, and you can just look down those 4 pages and get the answer to a lot of the questions that you have. Now, Dennis's book is great. It's more advanced if you're actually going to be doing a lot of drafting, but at the very least you can get this for free and refer to it. And this is also, Dennis was the UCIT drafting guidelines guy when these drafting conventions were approved. So basically he wrote the book both officially and in the textbook version as well. So I encourage you to get one of those. Most of the important ones are covered in that first ground plan lecture. So we talk about how to draw a gap in a wall or an archway or a swinging door and so on. So we can refer back to those if you need some clarification on how those work. Lettering must be all caps, and it wants to be neat and clear. You want to try to keep it the same size. You can give yourself 2 parallel little construction lines as guides so that you're not tempted to have your lettering kind of swoop up or get smaller as you go or bigger as you go, that kind of thing. Keep it on the 90s or aligned to an object that you are labeling. Don't simply draw on your ground plan or a photocopy of the blank generic. You want to tape this down and then put another piece of paper on top of that. I recommend the process, which I explained in one of those other videos. Put the paper down on your table, tape over some tracing paper or some other kind of cheapy paper on top of this, and that's the one that you're going to scribble on and kind of move things around and make erasures and write notes to yourself, and it's just totally a mess. Well, once you've got it looking exactly the way that you want, you can then photocopy that if you want so it's clean, or just go right ahead and throw the vellum on top of that. So you've got 3 stacks here. You've got the generic on the bottom, the blank piece of paper on the bottom. You've got your scribbly version of the set, and then you're going to trace over on top of that with a beautiful version where you're watching your line weights and all your line quality, and you're going to have beautiful lettering and all that. And then you can kind of just relax and go on autopilot because all you're doing is cleaning up the drawing after you've done all the thinking, the designing part on the thinner, messier paper. Plans must have a border, and it wants to be 1/2 inch away from the edge of the paper, unless it's a very small drawing, then we can get away with that being a little bit smaller. But you want that border to make everybody know that they've got the entire drawing, so the photocopy hasn't been cropped or something like that, and there's some important bit of information. Nothing should touch or cross the border except your title block. Your title block connects with the border, but it doesn't cross over it. So don't let your center line shoot over your border or have parts of your set going over the border. The border is kind of the edge of the universe in these drawings. And you also don't want to have a big piece of paper like this with your drawing right in the middle of it. Sometimes people will get a bigger piece of paper. The generic is 11 by 17, and they'll tape that down and then it'll put a big 24 by 30 inch piece of paper or something on top of that, and then draw the generic in the middle of it, and then put a border around the 11 by 17 part like this, where you've got like 5 inches of blank paper around it. Just crop it or use a smaller piece of paper. You also don't need to include other information that's out in the house. For a set ground plan, don't include your lighting positions unless they're like boom positions that are going to get in the way. But overhead lighting positions, you leave those off. And you don't need to draw the whole house. You're just going to draw maybe the first row or two here, unless you are in a theater or you're using a design where you're really working out into the house. You've built some platforms or whatever out in the seating, and then of course you want to show that. But otherwise you can just give us like the front row, if you even have seats in there at all. The title block must be in the lower right corner, and it wants to connect with the sheet border. There's a lot of different ways that you can draw title blocks. You have a lot of choices there, but they need to be anchored to that lower right-hand corner. So this one's fine. You can use the sort of lighting designer style and run it up the side, the right-hand side. That's a really convenient way to do it. You can run it across the bottom of the paper down the long edge. That's fine. As long as it's anchored to that lower right hand corner, you're fine. You've got a lot of different versions. Here's just the default one that I use all the time. This is kind of the old school title block down in that lower right hand corner, and this is the information that you want to have in your title block. At the top, you're going to have the venue that you're in. That could be your high school if you're a MOTS teacher, or that could be SOU main stage or the generic theater or whatever it is. You're going to name what the venue that you're working in is at the top, and then the next one down is going to be the name of the show. Below that is what is this drawing. Then below that is the scale. You always want to make sure you have a scale. If you have nothing on your title block except for a couple of things, it's going to be name of the show, name of the drawing, and the scale. Like you saw that little stair unit a few slides back. It just said amazing show, stair unit, and the scale. That's the essential stuff. But you can also typically add the director's name, the designer's name. I usually include the TD. A date is a really useful thing to get into the habit of starting to add in case you make changes. You can say, which version is this? Is this the September version or is this the October version? Oh wait, here's the date. That's useful to include. And then also a plate number. You can just put 1 if you're just drawing a ground plan for a class. But of course you want to number your plates if you have multiple plates in a real set of drawings. So the walls of your theater must be filled in one of 3 ways. You can do the traditional 45-degree cross hatch. It looks terrific, but it's very time consuming because you want to use your T-square and your 45-degree triangle to do that and be very clean and precise with the way you draw those in. You can't just freehand those in. It's just not just sketching in 45-degree lines. That's not how you want to do that. What I really recommend is the ruled parallel line option here, which kind of looks like this down over here. That ruled fill, I show you how to do that in the tips and tricks video, and it's just making sure that you have 2 nice thick outside lines. See, even in the CAD drawing here, there's still 2 thick black lines there with the gray fill inside. So you need to draw those nice heavy lines and then come in with your pencil and your T-square or your triangle and draw these fill lines, these parallel lines. Just watch that other tutorial and you can see how that is done. I'm getting really squishy on this too, especially with the big walls here. I'll let you use a gray design marker, like a 10% gray. So draw the lines in with your thick, heavy lines with pencil, and then come in. You want to still rule it. You want to use your tools to very cleanly draw in with a felt marker on a very pale gray. Don't come in with a black Sharpie. That's going to look terrible. Come in with a nice gray marker, like a design marker, and you can do that instead. So that's totally unorthodox, but I'll let you get away with that because so much of the gray fills that we're using in CAD basically look like that. Ideally, the set walls are also filled with that same technique to make those nice and clear as well. Not as essential if the set walls are filled, but they are section cuts just like the theater walls are, so really we should be filling our theater walls the same way. Platform heights are indicated as inches, not feet or feet in inches. So it's 24 inches off of the stage floor, not 2 feet. So don't forget the plus or the minus, especially if you have a level below your stage floor. If you've got steps out into the house, like this over here. So here's the stage floor at 0. And then there are these steps that are each 6.5 inches descending down onto the floor of the house. Well, those are going to be negative 6.5 and negative 13 and so on all the way down to the house floor. You only want to have these little height markers, these cumulative inch height markers on objects that actors stand on. So that's like the landing of a staircase, or if maybe you've got a scene where there's a stone bench in a garden and you just know that they're going to be standing on that bench. Even though it's not actually a platform, you could throw a height marker on that because, you know, it's just the director's going to get those actors up on that bench. It's inevitable. And that's going to help out your lighting designer figure out how high people are. You don't need to put this on the tops of walls unless somebody stands on the top of the wall. So you're not using these cumulative inch markers for anything other than places where people are standing on. There's this little slide here on the first ground plan tutorial that talks a lot about this, that talks about how platform heights are measured from the stage floor, negative or positive, where to put them, and so on. So I refer you back to that if you're not sure. I did want to cover ramps in a little bit greater detail, just simply because it is a little different than some of the other kinds of platforms. If you have a ramp that you're going up like a wheelchair ramp or just a uphill kind of ramp, you're going to start off with the height at the bottom of the ramp here. In this case, it's just lying on the stage floor, so +0, but there's no change. You could just roll right up in here. So you can do +0 and then draw this arrow up and just label it ramp up. But then there is a break here. There is a line right here because there's a break in the angle right there. It doesn't curve up gently. It actually has a break in the angle. And this little landing up here is +8 inches. But because there's no change in height on this ramp except for the top and the bottom, then you can draw it like this. However, you could have a ramp like this where you step up to get onto the top of that ramp. In that case, just put the height, in this case, +8 inches. Like how high is this right here? If that's 8 inches, then go ahead and say 8 inches right there. And then you do the ramp up indication. And then let us know what the height of this landing is once you get up to the top of that. So +14 inches to get to the top of that landing. And then if you have steps at both ends like this, then you just say how high is that first step, and then how high is the top of the ramp. So if the top of this ramp is 14 inches, then just put that mark there. So we know this ramp is going from 8 to 14 inches, even though there's another step up to get to this 22 landing up here. So all three of these kind of ramps can appear on your sets, and those are the different ways that you draw them. Now you might have an organic shaped ramp. So you can use little contour lines. If you've ever gone hiking and you've used a trail map that has contour lines, it'll say on the map, each one of these contour lines is 100 feet or something. And that'll let you know how high or how steep an area is. And the closer they are together, so if each one of these contour lines, for example, represented 3 inches, let's just say, then we would say, all right, well, from here to here is 3 inches, and here to here is 6 inches, and that's 9 inches and 12 inches, right? So we've gone from stage floor to a foot high pretty fast. So that means that our slope has got to be fairly steep right there. But then it kind of starts to get a little bit more flattened out, and the contour lines can be more gradual. If it's really important, you can actually do just like a map and say each one of these contour lines equals some length. But if all you're trying to do is suggest the shape of the ramp, you can just draw the contour lines in. Again, you can freehand these because they are organic shapes, and I would use a lighter line weight than I would for the outline of the actual ramp itself. And then I might call that slope up instead of ramp up. Now there is a solid break right over here because there is a solid break right there in that platform levels to up to this +14 inch. However, if you're doing Prospero's Rock or whatever, and you've got a completely organic thing, then you can draw the whole thing just like it looks like on those hiking maps, right? So we can see there's a big step right here to this 12-inch level right here. So this little cliff is indicated by this tight collection of rings right over here. And there's another steep little run right here. That's this right there to this little plateau at 20 inches. That's this area over here, this little 20-inch plateau. And then a little gradual rise up to this final high perch up here that's 30 inches above the stage. So those are all useful ways to draw out ramps. Objects overhead, over the 6-foot cutting plane from our stage deck. Remember, our ground plans have that 6-foot level, the top of the actor's head, 6 foot off of the stage floor is what we are using as our big horizontal section cutting plane to cut through. So things that are above that 6-foot stage deck are shown as dashed lines, and you want to label those overhead objects. So the desert ground row, pyramids, curtain, Jacob's tent, all these things that are flying in are labeled on a ground plan, at least on a cumulative master ground plan. So objects below 6 foot are solid lines, and if portions of the same object overhang the 6 feet but do not extend below 6 feet, then that portion of the object is shown as a dashed line. So this little block of text is just basically describing what this is. Here's a little wing unit here that has some palm fronds on it. So down below here, where that is touching the stage floor and the actor can actually bang into it, this is the 6 foot height, right? Right here through the actor's head. Then all of this down over here, because it sticks out to this little point, is going to be drawn as a solid line. And then because overhead it's completely something the actor could walk underneath, it turns into a dashed line. So here it is on the actual ground plan, and here's just a view of the elevation showing how that works. Let me show you another example of that as well. Objects that are completely above 6 feet are drawn as dashed lines. So if you have a sign hanging overhead, something that's like a border, that's going to be completely a dashed line. It's a good idea to label what that is so we know what it is. But you might have a sign or something that's floating, that's being flown in, that doesn't actually come all the way to the stage floor, but it does come below the 6 foot height marker. And then that's how you want to draw this. Is this is a solid object. Even though it doesn't go all the way to the stage floor, it does come into our 6 foot world where things are solid, so the lines around that object have to be solid as well. You might actually include the note trim height plus 24 inches to let us know that, this doesn't actually come all the way to the stage floor, it's floating 24 inches off of the stage floor. So the label for this unit, when you draw it on your ground plan, might include this bit of information to let us know that it's not actually touching the stage floor, but we have to draw it as a solid object because the actor is going to bang into it if they try to walk in that direction. Organic and diagonal objects are drawn in a similar way. They're drawn as solid lines below 6 feet, and they transition to dashed lines overhead once they pass above 6 feet. So if you're doing Crucible or something and you've got a big diagonal beam like this, all right? So here's that 6 foot height there, if you can see that little red dashed line there by the actor's head, that 6 foot height is cutting right through this beam. So all of this portion down over here, we're looking down at the top of the beam. So we're going to draw that just like we would any other object that we're seeing from above in our plan view. Now, if you want to be really fancy, you could draw a little section cut right here where it actually is a section cut. We're actually cutting right through it, right in this little like 1 foot thick part right here. So you could draw it like that. That's the accurate way to do that. But more importantly, you're showing that beyond that point here, all this overhead, hanging overhead, is a dashed line because the actor can't walk on the plan view. The actor can't walk through here without banging into the beam. But as soon as they get over here where it's a dashed line, where our little figure is standing, they have no problem walking underneath there because it's above our 6 foot cutting plane. Same thing is going on with that little tree down over here. So if we have a little 1 foot 6 inch high spot on our tree where an actor could come and sit down and they can hang on to this part of the tree and so on. Well, the tree trunk is drawn as a section cut like any other wall because we are going to cut through that tree trunk at the 6 foot mark. We could show the roots of the tree down over here from top view. We can have a little dashed line showing where the canopy is. The lighting designer is going to want to know that. This whole branch over here is completely above 6 feet, so that whole thing is a dashed line. It's good to know where it is, but it's not going to get in the way of our blocking. But this little tree seat here, I might mark it as tree seat and give it a little height so that we know how high this little tree seat is for the actor to come and sit on here. And then once it goes beyond this line, it turns into dashed lines. So it just transitions into dashed lines. Another thing that we can do to see that is having some sort of like broken wall, or maybe this is some kind of cut drop or something. You might have this kind of object on your stage where you have portions of an object on the ground level, but they're below the 6 foot height mark, and then there's parts that are above it. Now, things that are on the ground take precedent over objects overhead. So this part of our broken wall, let's just picture this as a kind of ruined wall here. So this part of our flat is solid. It goes from the floor above 6 foot and higher. So it's going to be a section cut like any of the other walls that we would have. Now, this little portion right here has stuff overhead, but we don't want to draw this as a dashed line here, even though there is stuff overhead, because there's, more importantly, stuff down here below the 6 foot height. And that's going to get the solid outline, but it doesn't get the fill because an actor could come and stand on this or sit on it, put their foot on it, whatever. So we're drawing kind of the broken contour line action on this chunk of the wall. But then it stops right here. And then from here on out, everything above that is a dashed overhead line. So we have sort of 3 parts of this wall, a part that is both above and below, a part that's just below, or actually above and below, but has a gap in the middle of it. So we draw it like this, and then a part that's only above 6 feet. And so that has just the dashed line. Hopefully that makes sense. One other view of this is if you have a little wagon unit, for example, where say there's this little roof portion over your wagon, and it's perfectly lined up with the sides of your 4x8 platform. There's a little wall in the back, and it's holding this little cantilevered roof out over here. Well, you're not going to dash these lines because this roof is over here, because the edge of your 8-inch high platform is more important. The actor stepping up onto this platform, where the platform is more important on the ground plan than that there's a roof hanging over here. But over here where it does stick out a little bit from the platform, well, you can go ahead and do the dashed lines for an overhang right there. So this portion needs to be the solid line because the platform is there, even though it's perfectly in line with the roof. We don't dash the line. Now, if this roof was sticking off the sides of the platform 6 inches, then we would have a little dashed line over here that was 6 inches offset from the edge of the platform. That would be fine. But if they're in exactly the same plane vertically, then the solid object down on the ground has to take precedence. So the solid line is more important than the dashed line. So please review the first ground plan for more information on overhead objects and the second levels. There's a little section in there talking about stairs and a little landing and all that sort of thing. So if you need to review those before you do your drawings, I recommend that. Your drawing must have a center line, and it wants to be a long, short dash. So don't forget, that's a super basic thing, what a center line looks like. It's a long line, a long dash that's maybe 1 inch long, and then a little space, and then you've got another little, maybe a 1/4 inch dash, and then a little space, and then a 1 inch long line. And, you know, really, a nice clean ground plan has that actual measured rhythm to it. And if you can kind of eyeball that and get it really close, I'm not going to get a ruler out and measure each one of your dashes, but if they're teeny tiny little dots at one end of your drawing and they're huge dashes on the other end, they want to be consistent. One nice little center line. That's not a hard thing to do, and it looks good. This is covered in that ground plan tutorial. So remember, also in that ground plan tutorial, this little blue center line symbol here is just an enlargement of what's going on down here in case you couldn't see it. This is back from the days when this was a PowerPoint lecture. But yeah, you don't draw this blue part on here or the circle around it. You're only drawing the little C and the L on top of your center line. And it's better if it's off the edge of the stage if you have room. You could put it here on the actual stage deck, but it's better if you've got room off the edge to put it. And again, you don't want it to cross over your border. So a black box might have two intersecting center lines crossing in the center of your space, and that's fine. You can, if you don't have a plaster line, if you don't have a proscenium arch, then you're not going to have a center line and a plaster line. You might have two center lines. So there might be a spot in your black box theater or your flexible space or whatever that you're just saying, all right, the distance from this wall halfway is here, and the distance from this wall halfway is here. But if there's something else, some other convention in your theater that is, well, we measure things from where the height of the roof changes. You know, it's 15 feet here, and then it drops down to 9 feet right here. And we consider that the edge of the playing space. So that we're not using the wall-to-wall dimension for our center line. That's useless. We're going to use where the seating is or where some object in our theater is. It doesn't matter what you use as your origin point here, your 0, 0, as long as everybody working on your show agrees that that's the point that we're all taking measurements from. Please clearly label all the objects and exits on your plan. So if you've got places that are going off to the kitchen door or whatever, and you want to label objects that are not clear. So there's not, this little guy right here is a telephone. It's not labeled as such, but it's pretty clear that it is. But this is what is this little L thing here? Well, it's a shelf. What is this little object here? Well, we don't know what that is. It's just two rectangles. Well, we put the label trunk on there to make that clear. Even over here with the table, that's pretty much a table and chairs, even though it doesn't say table and chairs. The lamp above is a question, but the table and chairs are pretty clear. So you don't have to label every single thing. If you wanted to put table and chairs on here, great. But don't put table, chair, 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 chair around the table and chairs, because that's just not necessary. So you're just going to want to label things that either, like, maybe I get the idea that this is some kind of bed here, But all right, oh, that's Blanche's cot. Now that's important for us to know that this is also a bed. It's not labeled as such, but we want to make sure that this is clear in there. So that sink is not labeled as a sink, that kind of thing. So do you want to label things that need labels? And it's probably better to err on the side of more labels than not. I've kind of gotten a little thin on some of my labels here, actually. Like, that's a chair right there, but it's not totally clear that that's a chair. So I probably should have put chair right there. So there are things that you can add. It's better to have too many labels than too few labels, is basically what I'm trying to say. When you go to do your labeling, all of these are okay. You can say bookcase and draw a straight leader line to it, or you can do a little fish hook kind of whip leader line going to it, or you can write on the object if it fits. If it doesn't fit, don't try to cram it in there. Use one of these two other options over here, but not that. You can't have your label sort of floating off in space. Remember, they want to be all caps. They want to be on the 90s, or they want to be rotated to the object. Just make those drawings nice and clear, those labels nice and clear. Don't forget to include your masking, your psych, your soft goods, backstage info. It's really important to include your masking on your ground plan, even if it's just the default velour legs that are in the theater that you're using. Include those on your drawing. If it's part of your design, even more important to think about how you're incorporating your masking into the design. So here's my little palm wing units that we were looking at before. I've got a couple of those on stage that were part of the masking, part of the design. So those are clearly indicated, as well as the actual soft goods that belong to the theater. So you want to include all that information as well. For organic shapes, just draw the top outline of what it looks like. Remember, drafting is simply a drawing without perspective. So if we're going to draw a tree stump, then just draw that little outline of what the roots look like. And then in this case, I've put a height marker on it because it's probably something that somebody's going to stand on or sit on or something like that. An actor's going to deal with this tree stump. It's there for a reason, right? But I've just labeled it because it might be a little unclear as to exactly what I'm looking at. But once I put the little label on there, then that's clearly a tree stump. Same thing with this little log. So I've got a log, I've labeled it. It's pretty clear what it is. I've just put these little shading lines here to suggest the kind of cylindrical shape of that log lying on the stage. But you don't need to there's no special symbol for driftwood, log, organic rock. There aren't architectural symbols for those things. We just draw them how they look. So we've already talked about trees a little bit already. So we can just draw a section cut of the trunk of the tree where it's breaking through the 6-foot mark. Anything below that, like roots or things that are sticking out, can be drawn as solid, unfilled objects. And then anything over the 6-foot mark, like branches that are completely overhead, are just dashed lines. You may not even need to include these if they're not important. And you might think about drawing the little canopy dash there just for your lighting designer's sake. If you have something that's completely organic like this, think about drawing the contour lines. Notice the contour lines are a little lightweight than the actual footprint of the object here. And this lets us know that Prospero can take a very gentle step up here and kind of walk his way up to this part of his little promontory. That's going to be a lot easier, a lot gentler climb than trying to go up this way. This is from here to here. We're going up to 5 feet from 0 on the stage floor to here. That's pretty steep. This is basically like a wall here. He'd have to boost himself up to get to there. But this direction, he can come and walk nicely up. And it's just labeled what it is, Prospero's Cliff. So I would really consider adding a note section to clarify things on a ground plan. Now, maybe that's not required for a class ground plan, but a real one might call for that. And a note section is one of two things. It's something that you want to indicate on the drawing that you don't want to take a bunch of room on the actual ground plan to talk about. So like right here, I don't know if you can see that, but it says C Note 4. And that's just referring to the fact that, hey, we may or may not want this little masking flat on here. Let's talk to the director about that. So I'm not going to put that information, this whole Note 4 right here on the ground plan. I can just call it out and say, hey, look over at the notes and read more information about this. And you can also use a notes section for a universal bit of information. Like we're going to cover the whole stage floor in 1/2-inch masonite. That's a good universal note to include up on here. And remember that drafting is just a drawing with no perspective. I've said that a couple of times now. So if you don't know how to draw something, think about how it would look from the top down. So an icebox, a sink, a phone, a chair. Just imagine it from above and then draw that outline. There's no symbol for sink or icebox or chair or trunk. If it needs a label, add the label. Otherwise, just draw the footprint of the thing or how it looks from above. And that's all you need to do to include it on a ground plan. You're just basically giving a symbol That's going to let the people that are looking at the ground plan know, oh, okay, that's where Blanche's trunk is going to be set up. I see. I understand. And then finally, so just kind of wrapping up here, you just want to make sure that your drawing has all those elements. It's fitting nicely on your page. You've got your title block, you've got your border, you've got your center line, your plaster line if it's required, and you've got nice line weights, really clear looking at what are your actual objects. You're not getting your objects and things that are not real objects, that are drafting conventions confused. All those things together are going to make your drawing look a lot clearer. So there's all different kinds of ground plans for different kinds of sets with different kind of challenges. This one's got a big sand dune coming down on top of some rugs. There's all sorts of things that we're going to run into. So just review that first ground plan tutorial when you sit down to do this. Just go through the PDF or watch the video, whichever is easiest for you, and make sure that you've got those simple things down. And drafting a ground plan at the very least is actually pretty straightforward. Again, you're just drawing a map of what your set wants to look like. So good luck.